In the summer of 1553, the ancient Tower of London loomed over the city like a silent sentinel, its cold stone walls steeped in centuries of history and bloodshed. Within its shadowed confines, a fragile hope flickered amidst the gloom, bodied in the figure of Lady Jane Grey. The young girl, barely 17, found herself ensnared in a perilous game of power and succession. Moments of hope, brief letters, whispered prayers, fleeting visitors, were swallowed by long hours of silence and solitude. Jane's youthful face, so often lit by the glow of learning and faith, was shadowed by the growing awareness of her precarious position. She was a queen in name only, her power a fragile veneer masking the ruthless political currents that threatened to sweep her away. A pawn moved by forces far beyond her control, the nobility grappled with the legitimacy of her claim, their ambitions and fears intertwining to create a volatile landscape. The nobility's machinations were as intricate as the tower's architecture, each stone laid with intent, each alliance forged or broken with ruthless calculation. Jane's fate was no longer in her own hands, but had become a matter of survival amid the shifting tides of Tudor politics. The death of King Edward VI had unleashed a tempest of succession disputes and religious strife, leaving the realm teetering on the edge of chaos. While it had once safeguarded monarchs and served as a symbol of unassailable authority, it also bore witness to the fragility of human life and the transient nature of rule. For Lady Jane Grey, the walls that enclosed her were both a sanctuary and a prison, reflecting the paradox of her brief ascent to the throne, a moment of radiant possibility overshadowed by the shadows of impending loss. Jane was painfully aware of the dangers that lurked beyond her chamber door, and hope wavered on the edge of despair. The tower held its breath. The young queen, caught in the whirlwind of history, remained a solitary figure amid the grandeur and gloom. Her story, etched into the stones of the fortress, would become one of the most poignant chapters in the Tudor saga, a testament to the human cost of ambition, faith, and the relentless pursuit of power. The tower, with all its secrets and sorrows, stood as both witness and participant in the unfolding tragedy. Its ancient stones, destined to remember the fleeting reign of the 9 Days Queen long after the world outside had moved on. Her days were filled with prayer and study, a sanctuary of order in a world unraveling at the seams, soon to be shattered by the cruel winds of betrayal and political intrigue. Following the death of King Edward VI, the kingdom teetered on a precipice, its future caught between contending claims and religious fervor. It was within this turbulent tempest that Lady Jane Grey found herself thrust unwillingly onto the throne, a figurehead crafted by ambition and desperation rather than rightful succession. The path that led her from hopeful queen to prisoner was paved with the machinations of powerful men, their loyalties as shifting as the shadows within the tower's ancient walls. When the castle fell silent and shadows deepened, the fortress seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The cold stones absorbed the sorrows and fears of its prisoners, echoing with the footsteps of those who had walked its corridors before. For Lady Jane Grey, these nights were a liminal space between the present and the inevitable future, a haunting prelude to the tragedy that awaited. The scholars who visited her spoke of scripture and philosophy, seeking to bolster her resolve and prepare her for the trials ahead. In these moments, the tower's oppressive walls faded into the background, replaced by a vision of grace and dignity that belied her youth. The tower, once a symbol of royal protection, had transformed into a crucible of suspicion and betrayal. Courtiers and guards moved through its halls with guarded expressions, their eyes betraying the unease that permeated the fortress. Every knock on her door, every whispered conversation, just beyond hearing, seemed to carry the weight of doom. Jane's elevation to the throne had been orchestrated by powerful nobles, desperate to prevent the return of Catholic Queen Mary Tudor. Yet, this gamble had placed Jane at the heart of a deadly game, where alliances shifted like sand and loyalty was a scarce commodity. The tower, once a royal fortress and symbol of monarchical might, had become a prison that echoed with whispers of betrayal and impending doom. Lady Jane Grey was unlike many who had come before her, raised in noble halls and tutored by the finest scholars. She was renowned for her intelligence, piety, and an unwavering devotion to Protestant faith. Her youth, however, was marked not by the carefree joys of adolescence, but by the heavy weight of destiny. The delicate balance between hope and despair hung tenuously in the air. As the stone corridors bore silent witness to a girl caught between the promise of power and the threat of obliteration, the tower's atmosphere was thick with tension, a place where history seemed to fold in upon itself. To the untrained eye, it was a fortress of stone and mortar. To those imprisoned within, it was a labyrinth of fate and finality. Here, Lady Jane's brief reign as the so-called 9 Days Queen was but a fleeting moment, a fragile chapter in a story written by ambition and treachery. The very walls seemed to murmur with the ghosts of those who had passed before her, kings, queens, traitors, and saints, their silent lamentations weaving through the air, a haunting reminder of the tower's dual nature as both protector and executioner. Jane's innocence was starkly juxtaposed against the brutal reality closing in around her. Where once she had walked free in the gardens of her family home, now she paced the narrow confines of her chamber, its barred windows offering only glimpses of a world from which she was swiftly being cut off. The grandeur of the Tudor court, with its glittering pageantry and whispered intrigues, seemed a distant memory, replaced by the cold, unyielding stone that encased her like a tomb. Within the tower's walls, time seemed to stretch and contract unpredictably. The young queen's predicament was emblematic of the broader turmoil engulfing England. Despite her learned demeanor and steadfast faith, yet amid the encroaching darkness, Jane's spirit remained unbroken. The dichotomy of the tower's role was never more apparent than in the quiet hours of the night. Outside her chamber, the political storm raged unabated. The tower's imposing presence was a reminder that power and vulnerability existed side by side. As days turned into nights, the fragile stillness that had settled over the Tower of London was but a fragile veil. At the heart of the conspiracy was John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, a man whose grasp on power was as tenacious as it was ruthless. Desperate to secure his influence and prevent the Catholic restoration promised by Mary Tudor, her support among the populace and key nobles grew steadily. Fueled by loyalty to the old faith and a vision of England restored to Catholicism, the corridors that had echoed with the footsteps of monarchs now reverberated with the silence of captivity. Guards watched her with wary eyes, their presence a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and death within these walls. The young queen's surroundings, once filled with the trappings of royal ceremony, were now stripped to their barest elements, reflecting the stark reality of her fall. The populace, caught between loyalty to the old faith and the promise of reform, watched with bated breath as events unfolded. Jane's family, torn between allegiance and self-preservation, navigated the treacherous waters with caution and fear. Their support, once a source of strength, became a liability as the political winds shifted. The young queen's isolation deepened, her fate increasingly sealed by the very hands that had once guided her rise. Their faces masks of solemnity that barely concealed the predetermined outcome. Judges and officials handpicked for their allegiance to Mary Tudor's cause, assembled to deliver the verdict that had been scripted in the shadows of court politics. The charges leveled against Jane were severe treason, usurpation, and the disruption of the rightful succession. But their substance was less important than their utility in securing a swift conviction. The trial was an exercise in expediency, a means to an end for those seeking to stabilize a kingdom fractured by religious and dynastic conflict. The fate of the young queen became a symbol of the larger battle, raging across the nation, a conflict not merely of crowns and titles, but of beliefs, identities, and the very soul of England. Lady Jane Grey, once the hopeful sovereign of England, now stood accused before a tribunal whose verdict had been cast long before the first word was spoken. The trial swift and merciless, it's less a search for truth than a performance designed to legitimize the political necessity of her downfall. Within these walls, justice bowed to power, and the young queen found herself powerless against the tide that would sweep away her brief reign. Jane's story, once a tale of hope and promise, was now being rewritten in the harsh ink of betrayal and political necessity. The tide of opinion shifted rapidly, a quiet defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The once vibrant halls seemed to close in, the weight of betrayal pressing ever heavier upon Jane's shoulders. The political intrigue that had propelled her to the throne had now become the chain that bound her, a testament to the perilous nature of power in Tudor England. As the fortress held its breath in anticipation of the coming storm, the young queen remained a poignant figure, a victim of ambition, faith, and the ruthless gamesmanship that defined an era. Letters smuggled through sympathetic hands carried messages of hope and consolation, while her prayers echoed softly in the chamber's gloom. But the shifting allegiances within the tower's shadowy corridors were a stark reminder that power was as fleeting as trust, and that Jane's fate was entwined with the ruthless currents of Tudor politics, and the Duke of Northumberland's carefully constructed house of cards began to crumble. Behind the thick stone walls, the struggle for control continued. With nobles negotiating alliances and plotting the next moves in a deadly game where the stakes were nothing less than the throne itself, Jane's captivity was both a symbol and a tool in this contest, her presence a bargaining chip and a warning to those who might challenge the emerging order. The tower, a fortress of stone, became a crucible where loyalty was tested and treachery forged anew. As Mary's forces rallied, designed not to seek justice, but to legitimize the inevitable. Those who had once celebrated her ascent now ensured her swift condemnation, their actions reflecting the merciless logic of Tudor governance. Yet, even as the noose tightened, Jane's composure and dignity shone through, stark contrast to the cynical world that had ensnared her. The political landscape transformed from a chessboard of intrigue into a battlefield of open conflict, and Jane's brief reign faltered under the weight of inevitable defeat. He orchestrated the elevation of Jane, his daughter-in-law, to the crown. His maneuvering was cold and calculated, a masterstroke of political expediency that sacrificed Jane's future to preserve a Protestant England aligned with his own ambitions. The young queen, though learned and pious, was little more than a pawn in a game dominated by seasoned players versed in the art of betrayal. The court that once seemed a place of splendor and opportunity transformed overnight into a theater of suspicion and danger. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, their words laced with fear and opportunism. Alliances formed and dissolved with alarming speed. The promises of protection and power offered by her supporters dissolved into abandonment as the nobility realigned themselves with the rising tide of Mary's cause. Arrested and charged with treason, Jane was cast into the Tower. The very fortress that had once symbolized her fleeting authority, now a cold prison marking her fall from grace. The betrayal was not just political, but deeply personal. Those who had once pledged loyalty turned their backs, revealing the brutal calculus of survival in Tudor England. Each noble seeking to position themselves advantageously in the unfolding drama. The fragile legitimacy of Jane's claim was a sword hanging precariously over her head, its edge sharpened by the ambitions of those who viewed her as both a means to an end and a threat to their own power. Mary Tudor's rightful claim to the throne cast a long and unyielding shadow. The moment of Jane's downfall was swift, yet crushing. Imprisonment within the Tower deepened the sense of impending doom that had shadowed Jane's days as queen. Yet even as betrayal closed in, Jane's resolve remained unbroken. Her intellect and faith became her bulwarks against despair. The political machinations did not end with her arrest. The atmosphere within the Tower grew increasingly oppressive as Jane's trial loomed. The legal proceedings were steeped in political expediency outside the Tower's walls. The city of London was alive with rumors and shifting allegiances. The complexity of the situation was mirrored in the personal tragedies that unfolded alongside the grand narrative of power. Within the Tower's cold embrace, every day was marked by a growing awareness of the inescapable. The cold stone chamber within the Tower of London had become a stage upon which history's cruelest act was about to unfold. The courtroom was filled with figures loyal to the new order. Amid the formalities, Jane's composure was a beacon of dignity. Her youth belied the steel within. It reinforced the absolute authority of Mary Tudor's claim and served as a warning to those who might challenge her reign. The proceedings were marked by a chilling absence of fairness. Evidence was scant, witnesses were few, and the outcome was never in doubt. The young queen's eloquence and reasoned defense were drowned beneath the weight of political expediency, a place where many before her had met their end. Her words, affirming her innocence and expressing forgiveness, left an indelible mark on those present. It was a poignant farewell that contrasted sharply with the accusations and betrayals that had led to her downfall. This moment of grace underscored the tragic dimensions of her story, a young woman caught in the relentless machinery of Tudor politics, her fate sealed by forces beyond her control. The weight of history pressed heavily upon it. Lady Jane Grey's trial and execution were not merely events of the moment, but chapters in a larger saga of power, faith, and betrayal. The return to Catholic rule promised stability to many. Her story was one of innocence destroyed by forces beyond her control, her poignant reminder that the crown could be both a symbol of glory and a harbinger of destruction. Those who had once plotted her rise and fall now faced the uneasy task of reconciling political necessity with the haunting legacy of a girl whose brief moment in the sun had ended in shadow. The Tower, with its grim history, now bore the weight of this new sorrow, a silent repository for the ghosts of ambition and betrayal. Yet the memory of the young queen who had briefly worn the crown was not so easily forgotten. Among courtiers and servants alike, whispers of Jane's fate circulated in hushed tones, a secret that grew heavier with each telling. The Tower, silent witness to her tragic end, seemed to absorb these murmurs, its halls resonating with a spectral grief that transcended the political triumphs now celebrated beyond its walls. Her dignity in the face of death, the swift justice meted out by a court of convenience, and the shadow of political intrigue that enveloped her story all converged to create a narrative as haunting as the fortress itself. The atmosphere was heavy, with a mixture of dread and respect. The Tower stood as a silent witness to the fragile nature of monarchy and the brutal cost of succession. Lady Jane Grey's brief reign and tragic end became a somber reminder of the dangers inherent in the pursuit of power. A story etched into the very fabric of Tudor history, destined to resonate through the centuries as a testament to the human toll of ambition and the merciless hand of fate. It was a chilling demonstration of Mary's authority and a stark warning to any who might oppose her rule. Ushering Mary I firmly onto the throne and restoring the Catholic faith to its former place of prominence. The brief and turbulent chapter of Jane's reign was swiftly erased from official history, a fleeting interlude overshadowed by the new queen's determined consolidation of power. Yet within the fortress walls of the Tower of London, the echoes of Jane's presence lingered, transforming the ancient stronghold into a place haunted not only by stone and shadow, but by the memory of innocence extinguished by ambition, a spectral presence that would haunt the fortress for generations. The place that had once promised protection had become a tomb for a queen whose reign was measured in days rather than years. Her story, marked by brief glory and tragic demise, became entwined with the very stones of the Tower, a lasting testament to the precarious nature of power in Tudor England. Yet beneath the veneer of political necessity lay a deeper sorrow, a recognition of the human cost embedded within the pursuit of power. Jane's death was a somber reminder that the throne was a prize as perilous as it was coveted, where innocence and ambition alike could be consumed by the unforgiving fires of history. As courtiers and guards alike bore witness to the final act of this sorrowful drama, Jane's youth and innocence cast a stark contrast against the severity of her sentence. Some mourned the loss of the young queen, moved by the tragedy of her youth and the injustice of her fate. Others saw her death as a necessary step in restoring stability and the rightful succession. The narrative of her life and death would be shaped and reshaped in the years to come, becoming a symbol of innocence destroyed by political ambition and the merciless realities of Tudor rule, evoking a profound sense of loss among those who observed. Her death was not merely a political necessity, but a human tragedy, a life extinguished in the service of power's ruthless demands. Underscoring the ruthless reality of Tudor justice, where the scales were tipped decisively in favor of power. She faced the proceedings with a quiet courage that spoke of unwavering faith and an acceptance of her fate. Despite the accusations hurled against her, she maintained her innocence, asserting that her actions had been guided by loyalty and duty rather than ambition. Her voice, gentle yet resolute, echoed through the chamber, a poignant contrast to the cold machinery of the court that sought to condemn her. The trial was not merely a legal formality, but a spectacle crafted to send a message. As the verdict was pronounced, the chamber seemed to close in around Jane, the words sealing her fate with a finality that left no room for hope. Jane's chambers, once filled with scholarly pursuits and prayer, became a space of quiet resignation. The young queen met her fate with a grace that deepened the poignancy of her story. Those who came to see her noted her calm demeanor, a reflection of faith fortified by hardship. In the face of death, she remained steadfast, embodying a tragic nobility that would echo through history. The sentence of death was a stark reminder of the peril faced by those who dared to ascend the throne without the full backing of the realm's powerful factions. For Jane, it was the culmination of a tragic arc that had seen her rise swiftly to the pinnacle of power, only to be cast down with equal rapidity. The Tower, once a symbol of royal authority, now bore witness to the fragility of that authority and the human cost it exacted. The days that followed were marked by a somber preparation for the inevitable. The execution itself was carried out within the grim confines of the Tower in her final moments. Jane spoke with a clarity and dignity that transcended the grim surroundings. The execution sent ripples through the court and the kingdom at large. Within the Tower's shadowed walls, the echoes of Jane's final moments lingered. The reaction among the populace and nobility was complex and fraught. As the Tower settled once more into its quiet vigil, in the stillness that followed, with the swift execution of Lady Jane Grey, the political landscape of England shifted irrevocably. Mary's accession to the throne was greeted with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Jane's death became emblematic of the human cost embedded in the ruthless pursuit of power. The memory of Lady Jane Grey did not fade into obscurity, but instead took on a life of its own within the fortress. Servants spoke in trembling voices of strange sightings and unexplained sounds. Tales born from grief, guilt, and the lingering presence of a spirit unwilling to rest. These stories wove themselves into the fabric of the Tower's legends. Jane's story, marked by youthful brilliance and tragic loss, resonated deeply in an era grappling with questions of legitimacy, faith, and authority. Lady Jane Grey's story became a touchstone for reflection and legend. Her brief reign and untimely death were retold with a mixture of reverence and sorrow, a narrative that challenged the official histories written by those who had triumphed. The haunting of the Tower by her memory served as a counterpoint to the political order restored by Mary. Her story was retold on stages and in verse, portraying her as a martyr, a young woman caught in the merciless gears of political ambition, yet unwavering in faith and dignity. With tales of her ghostly presence within the Tower's walls becoming a staple of local legend, stories circulated of a pale, sorrowful figure wandering the shadowed corridors. Her story raised difficult questions about the legitimacy of power and the ethical costs of political survival, gained a spectral significance that transcended its physical presence. It became a symbol of the tension between authority and vulnerability, inspiring generations to contemplate the interplay of power, faith, and vulnerability. Our narrative, shaped by history and myth alike, challenges us to remember that behind every throne lies a human story, one of dreams, sacrifices, and the haunting echoes of choices made long ago. The Tower of London stands as a silent guardian of these memories, its ancient stones forever entwined with the legacy of a queen whose brief flame illuminated the shadows of an age defined by both brilliance and tragedy. A place where the consequences of ambition were made starkly visible. The fortress's ghostly secrets and whispered histories ensured that Jane's story remained alive in historical memory and popular imagination, a haunting testament to the human cost behind the pursuit of power. Visitors to the Tower would hear of her fate not merely as a historical fact but as a living legend, a narrative that continued to captivate and haunt. Writers and thinkers grappled with the contradictions of a society that celebrated monarchy and divine right, while often enacting ruthless decisions that shattered lives, authority and innocence. Her brief reign and tragic death encapsulate the volatile nature of Tudor politics and the merciless realities faced by those entangled in its web. The cultural legacy she left behind invites us to reflect on the enduring struggles for justice, the complexities of political ambition, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. Jane's narrative became a lens through which to examine the precarious position of women in history. Caught between personal agency and the overwhelming forces of family, faith, and state, whose appearance was said to herald both tragedy and the enduring spirit of resistance. These spectral accounts transcended mere superstition, embodying a collective reckoning with the costs of political intrigue and the human stories obscured by official histories. Jane's ghost became a haunting reminder that some truths refuse to be silenced, lingering in the spaces between history and myth. These artistic interpretations emphasized her purity and victimhood. To some, she was a martyr of Protestant faith, a symbol of religious conviction and purity sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. To others, she represented the tragic consequences of ambition and manipulation, a young life destroyed by the machinations of those who wielded power without mercy. The spectral figure trapped between life and death within the tower's walls embodied these tensions, a living metaphor for the complexities of Tudor England's turbulent era, casting her as a beacon of innocence lost to the brutal realities of dynastic conflict. The image of the 9 Days Queen became emblematic of the fragile intersection between youthful idealism and the harsh demands of governance. A reminder that history is not solely shaped by those who hold power, but also by those whose voices are silenced. Depicting her in moments of quiet contemplation or serene acceptance, often surrounded by symbols of faith and martyrdom. Paintings and illustrations sought to capture the contrast between her delicate youth and the heavy crown thrust upon her, emphasizing the tension between vulnerability and regal authority. These works contributed to the evolving mythology around Jane, solidifying her status as a tragic heroine ensnared by forces far beyond her control. The Tower of London, forever linked to her fate, emerged as a potent symbol of confinement and spectral memory within these cultural expressions. Her spectral presence became a symbol of innocence, caught in the crossfire of dynastic ambition. The legacy of Jane's innocence and sacrifice was felt most keenly. Her story woven into the very fabric of the fortress, woven deeply into the fabric of English identity and collective memory. Her brief and tragic reign, marked by innocence, sacrifice, and betrayal, inspired a wealth of literature, art, and folklore that explored the complex themes embedded in her narrative. Jane's life and death were transformed into symbols that resonated far beyond the Tudor court, capturing imaginations and provoking reflection on the nature of power, justice, and human vulnerability. This became a lasting memorial to the complexities of Tudor England, a land where faith, ambition, and loyalty collided with devastating consequences. The ghostly presence attributed to her became a symbol not only of her personal tragedy, but of the broader human costs embedded within the relentless pursuit of power. A narrative that transcended her immediate fate to embody broader themes of sacrifice and the human cost of political strife. The story of the 9 Days Queen remained a poignant and haunting thread in its tapestry. Jane's memory, preserved through whispered tales and spectral sightings, transcended the political machinations that had condemned her, ensuring that her brief reign and tragic fate would endure in the collective consciousness. The tower, ever vigilant, held her story close, a timeless reminder that even in death, the echoes of innocence and injustice refused to be silenced. The tower, as the keeper of her memory, stood as a monument to these enduring tensions, transforming Jane from a historical figure into a spectral symbol of sacrifice and tragedy. Her ghostly whispers seemed to haunt the very stones that had confined her, a reminder that some stories refuse to be buried by time or politics. Beneath the surface of political reconciliation, the emotional and supernatural legacy of Jane's fate grew more profound. Her burial, conducted with the solemnity befitting a queen, yet shrouded in the secrecy imposed by her ignominious end, marked the beginning of a haunting era. It was no longer merely a place of political confinement, but a sacred space where the past and present converged in a spectral dance. The stories of her ghostly presence became intertwined with the tower's identity, attracting not only courtiers but also common folk drawn to the tales of a queen who defied fate with dignity and grace. Jane's haunting became a silent testament to the fragility of life and power. Echoing through the corridors long after the political storms had passed, the precise location of her resting place within the tower's grounds became a matter of whispered speculation, symbol of the unresolved tensions between memory and erasure. Her obscurity and death stood in stark contrast to the indelible mark she left upon the hearts and minds of those who remembered her brief and tragic life. The Tower's role as both fortress and prison took on new dimensions in the wake of Jane's execution. This haunting legacy was not confined to the Tower alone, but seeped into the wider cultural consciousness within the walls that had witnessed so much bloodshed and intrigue. In the quiet moments when the Tower's ancient stones seemed to breathe with the weight of centuries, as the Tower continued its watch over London and its evolving monarchy over the centuries, the story of Lady Jane Grey transcended the confines of history books and royal records to become a powerful cultural legend. In the centuries that followed, poets and playwrights found in Jane a figure of poignant tragedy and moral virtue. Visual artists likewise drew upon Jane's narrative. Folklore and popular imagination further enriched Jane's legacy. As interpretations of Jane evolved, so too did the roles she assumed within cultural narratives. The enduring fascination with Lady Jane Grey also sparked broader reflections on the nature of justice and mercy. The Tower of London itself, as the backdrop of Jane's rise and fall. Through the centuries, Lady Jane Grey's story has served as a poignant reminder of the fragile balance between hope and despair. In this way, the life and death of the 9 Days Queen continue to resonate,